right, we're live for episode 40 of Zenglop, the podcast. Let me just get situated here. A new microphone, or a repurposed microphone, so hopefully that's working better than the previous versions. Let me zoom in a bit there. Okay. For those of you listening on the podcast, I'm still futzing around with the video piece. So those of you watching on YouTube, good afternoon. Let me jump right in. So this is episode 40. It is the last day of 2018. I wanted to talk about Christmas Eve midnight service, which might be a surprising topic for those of you who've listened to the podcast for a while, or it might not be a surprising topic. It might be exactly what you would expect. So I'm going to talk about the service for a bit, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about a piece of music that it inspired, and then I am going to close by reading a bit of a poem. Some of the four quartets from T.S. Eliot. So that's the general shape of what the next 20 to 30 minutes will look like. A bit of discussion, recreating the experience of this really quite beautiful midnight midnight service, and the music that it impelled, the music that it made me think about. And then some poetry that also makes me think about. So this was a midnight service at a Methodist church, and I went with my daughter, who is now 19. We went last year. We are not a church-going family, although I was when I was her age and younger, and I attended a Methodist church. So it's sort of the religion of my childhood and young adulthood. In a sense, I did not maintain my connection to a congregation when I went to college, and then in my 20s is when I started to focus on meditation and other kinds of exploration in a whole gamut of stuff, from neo-paganism, New Age, ultimately landing on the Bon practice that I talk a lot about now. So midnight service ends at midnight. It doesn't start at midnight. And we went to the First United Methodist Church in Pittsburgh, which is a lovely building. It's quite large, and it is elegant, but it's not ornate, although it is beautifully situated and spatialized. There's a huge central room that has kind of a dome on top, and then the front piece. So I've actually been in there for other events. They do lease the space out for lecture series and similar music events. So I've been in the space. But so about 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve, seated there, not a large crowd, although I don't have any gauge. I don't know if it's a larger congregation than what normally shows up. Maybe 50 people. I don't know. I'm not very good at gauging crowds. 50 people, 100 people. Not sure. Certainly not a full room. And we sang carols, and there were a couple of readings, and there was a short sermon or teaching from the minister, who was wonderful. She spoke in a number of points, and I could see her pulling together a couple of common or consistent threads. One of them, that the communion table would be open for everybody, absolutely everybody. And she said nothing more specific than that, but the idea of the communion table being a place of total welcome. whether you were a churchgoer or any other identity or past or history was irrelevant. The communion was open to all of us. And that was really, that started the sense of loveliness, because that isn't always the case, and in many places it's explicitly not the case. You have to be baptized, you have to be a member of the church, the congregation, and to have that be the central part of the teachings and of the sermons was very effective. Like, the welcome was incredibly genuine, and so we went up and took the communion, which in a Methodist church is a piece of bread and a little glass of grape juice, and we knelt at the front of the communion altar, in front of all the pews in front of the sacristy. The music itself was very nice. There had been a handbell choir beforehand. The music director is a very, I don't know him, but he plays in a very open way, and will accompany in the background while there's some prayer or some activity going on, not all the time, and in a very elegant and gentle way. Again, I don't know if this is normal, if this is how the regular services go, but for Christmas Eve there was just this constant sort of pleasurable musical opening through the piece, or through the service. And then at the end of the service, the lights are dimmed and everyone has a little candle which is lit, and then we sing Silent Night. And in one way, everything is leading up to that moment when the candles are lit, and the congregation sings this beloved Christmas carol that is sort of so tuned into our cultural sense of what peacefulness means, that singing it brings that about. So by the end of the service was this very intelligent and intelligible, and when I say intelligent, I mean clearly articulated or immediately present sense of communion, meaning absolute welcome and total peace. A very compassionate sense, the kind of feeling I get with the Buddhist teachings of the compassion and the base of compassion. So I started to think of other ways what the communion or the timeless nature of communion. I have a couple of notes here. So the communion, the open table communion, the openness of being, and that it was outside of time. That when those kinds of sensations occur, one way of articulating it is this sort of this bubble that is around the experience that is filled with peace. Now, what does that mean to have something be filled with peace? Is peace an energy? Is peace light? Is peace warmth? Is it a quality of the air? I mean, it's not. It's one of those statements that really doesn't mean anything. But I sort of think what it means, and or how would I articulate it? And for me, the way to recreate that is to step outside time. And what is time? Well, one of the immediate ways that we measure time is in our own physiology, and our breath and our heartbeat, and things that we do that take time to progress. Immediate things like breath, larger scale things like our eating and sleeping and our shitting cycles, and then bigger things like our birth and our aging and our gradual mortality and folding into the end of our life. And that when I can think of that sort of separate, right? When I can imagine it as an object, separate from the actual passage of time, then that vector of passage through time it doesn't cease. There's no cessation of it, but there's a different perspective on it. Maybe that passage of time is not truly a passage. Maybe it's a rotation, right? Maybe, if that makes any sense. Like, the language isn't very good, but if the object of our own physiology can be considered as a whole from the moment of conception to the moment of death, and instead of thinking of how something is changing, and what if it was like just a different perspective on, let's say you had a really gnarly piece of wood, and if you looked at it end on, it might seem very narrow, and if you looked at it edgewise, it might seem very tall. If you held it at a different angle, the rough sides of the piece would shape your perception of it more. If you had this object that was rotating, you might think that it was changing, when in fact it's just rotating. So what if your life, my life, our physical incarnation is a rotation rather than a change, right? If time is not a factor. If time is not a factor, what does that mean? So as a musician, and as a writer, there's a couple of different things I think about when I think about timelessness. And one of them is like what I would say maybe the Messiaen approach. You listen to a piece by Messiaen, you, on a surface level, experience this sort of like mobile, like a hanging sculpture that has defined components that are always in shifting relationship to each other. But what you also have the sense of is that change in relationship is part of a cycle that would take an aeon to unfold, and then what we're seeing is a very small window into that much larger pattern. So a composition could create the illusion or create the affect of a very large cycle by presenting a moment or a fragment that is clearly a fragment of a much larger piece. And then it becomes our imagination that fills in the duration. The piece could be the cycle could be as long as the length of the universe, right? And we're just hearing 10 minutes of it. What does that mean? What does that sound like? So that's one way where music can create a sense of timelessness. The music, in a second way, the music could itself be very slow paced, slowly unfolding motifs, maybe a slowly unfolding motive as well. Motive for murder or mayhem. But like John Cage has pieces like that. The piece in the chapel, the 700-year piece with slowly vibrating strings. And I think some of the other minimalist, or I'll use the word minimalist, but I'm thinking more of composers like Arvo Pärt and John Tavener rather than composers like Philip Glass, who I think also achieves a sense of timelessness, but more through repetition and slight change in repetition. And in order to apperceive the changes, you have to not focus on the repetition. Do you know what I mean? It's like you have to hear the repetition as the ground that has to fall away, so that then you can hear the articulation of the change. And that shift is similar to the shift that's required to view human longevity as an object rather than as a process. So a sense of expanded, or a sense of a snippet of an expansive and expanded pattern is one. Slowly unfolding pieces or change where the change might take minutes for any perceivable change, and then repetition where the elements of meaning are woven into a ground, and you have to not ignore the ground, but let the ground fade into the background so that you can hear the changes. So I was thinking about music like that because I was filled with the sense from the Midnight Communion of this spaciousness and this peace that wasn't tranquil, it wasn't sedated, it was peaceful, which is a very active balance, a feeling of active balance, of real peace and openness, generosity. And I associate those feelings with those rare times when I feel still in my and stable in my meditation practice, when I really feel like I'm developing a different perspective on the unfolding thoughts and on the emotions and sensations of sitting. That step is always associated with this. Is it bliss? Is it peacefulness? Generosity, openness, clearing. I mean, Heidegger talks about clearing with Dasein. I don't want to get on a. I don't want to get into that right now, partly because I don't know it well enough, but also because I could probably then never stop talking. But this idea of clearing, distance, openness, generosity, all triggered by the openness of the offering of the communion, that the communion table was open to everyone, and that it was offered in this beautiful, gentle, simple fashion. So the piece, and I've actually just put up another video where I break down the patch. I don't know if you can see behind me the modular synthesis that I used. So I talk about the different cabling patterns that I used with the modules, and if you're interested, go check that out. But the piece is based on the most simple gesture, which is a sine wave with just a tiny bit of frequency modulation, almost like a tremolo. It takes about 20 seconds. There's an envelope applied to an amplitude envelope. And then over the course of almost 2 hours, very gradually apply second voices. That the second voice evolves. The wave, the in and out of that original sine wave never changes, always there. And then there's the second voice that begins identical to the first, but then there's some very small but consistent changes applied to that second voice that over time turns it into something quite different. So to hear the whole piece is you have to do a couple things. One of which is accept that this is not music like maybe we are comfortable thinking about music. Okay, sorry about that. Probably a good signal to wrap up. Yeah, no, it's time to wrap up. I think the live stream failed, and it's taken me a few minutes to figure out how to get it back up. And I was just going to call this then the episode that stops in the middle, but I figured out how to get it back started. But I think I'd said everything I was going to say about the music and say everything about the music and the communion. I will read the poem. Hold on a second. Let me just reach back and get that. So this is from the T.S. Eliot Four Quartets, the first of the four. It's called Burnt Norton. And the beginning stanza of the poem reads like this. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility, only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory, down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened. So that's the opening. The part I wanted to read was the very last stanza, and think again of the idea of stepping outside of time and observing change in phenomena, not as change, but as rotation. So back to the Burnt Norton, the final stanza here. The detail of the pattern is movement, as in the figure of the 10 stairs. Desire itself is movement, not in itself desirable. Love is itself unmoving, only the cause and end of movement, timeless and undesiring, except in the aspect of time caught in the form of limitation between unbeing and being. Sudden, in a shaft of sunlight, even while the dust moves, there rises the hidden laughter of children in the foliage. Quick, now, here, now, always. Ridiculous, the waste, sad time, stretching before and after. So a bit of Eliot there. Yeah, but so this is the last podcast of 2018, or probably when you're getting to hear it, the first of 2019. I wish everyone a happy new year tonight. I hope your holiday season was reflective, calm, jubilant, filled with refreshment, excitement, retirement, any and all, fill in the blanks. So thank you all. Leave a comment, subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll see you all next year. Keep your wits about you. Thank you, my friends.